What's up, everybody? The moment is here. It is time for my review of the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Now, flashback a week and some change ago when Apple was up on stage announcing all of the, incremental upgrades that were coming to this year's new iPhone lineup. Many of us, including myself, were not super excited. It definitely didn't feel as big as when we went from like the 11s to the 12s. But the 12s to the 13s, we felt like it was kind of like an incremental upgrade. Now, out of all the years to have one of these incremental upgrades, because there's been a few in the history of the iPhone trajectory, I must say that this one definitely kind of felt the largest. So before we jump into the review and all my thoughts going, down the list, which I have quite a few, I wanted to let you guys know about the third and final case that I'll be giving away from Zira. So as you see on my current iPhone, I do have a clear Zira MagSafe case. It's kind of a competitor to the Apple MagSafe case, and this one's pretty sweet, way better price. So I will be giving away one for the 13 Pro in this video. So I'm currently rocking the one for the Pro Max, but if you are picking up a 13 Pro or you know someone that has one and you just want to get a case for free, what I'll need you to do is like the video, comment on it, your Instagram handle, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Then follow me on Instagram, which the link to my Insta will be down in the description down below, so that way if your name is picked, I will be able to DM you directly on Instagram. I'll have the giveaway running for 2 weeks, so if you want to win a free case for your 13 Pro, go ahead and enter. If not, let's jump into the review. Where do we even start? I had so many thoughts on this phone. It's been a long time since I've reviewed an iPhone. I've gotten almost every iPhone since, I last reviewed an iPhone on my YouTube channel. But I forgot how much goes into these. There's a lot. So I broke it down in kind of different categories, essentially, of the upgrades themselves, and I wanted to walk you through what I thought about each of those. So the first one I want to start off with is the actual design of the iPhone. Now, being that I had an iPhone 12 Pro last year and I upgraded to a 13 Pro Max, the form factor and the actual design between the 2 years, it's very similar. I would say kind of the biggest thing that jumps out to people is the new camera bump on the back. So the camera modules have gone up quite a bit as far as, the sensor size and the pixel size and all this mumbo jumbo that essentially just means we have bigger cameras that can let more light in and just take better photo and videos. So compared to last year's models, the Pros got a little bit thicker, and I'm talking about so minusculely thicker that I personally didn't notice a difference at all. Now, this supposedly was to, incorporate a bigger battery, which I am 100% there for. So if you need to make it like a millimeter thicker in order to fit a bigger battery, you do you, Apple. I'm all for it. Now, there's also a smaller notch on the front of the phone, along with a little bit thicker bezels, at least that's what it looked like to me. Now, the notch, I didn't really notice, to be honest, that much of a difference with the notch. I know a lot of people see it in some instances and don't in others. I personally didn't really notice it too much. The notch hasn't really bothered me. I guess if you look at it side by side compared to last year's, it is noticeable, but it's one of those things that's like such a small update. It's not like they got rid of the notch, that it's kind of harder to really think about it. Apparently they made it short or more narrow, but I guess a little taller. I don't know, but anyway, the notch is still there. It's just a little smaller. Now, this is a chunker right here. This is like a dumbbell you could do some lifting with. This is legitimately the heaviest iPhone I've ever had. Probably didn't help that I have the Pro Max model. I'm trying to compare that to my last phone, which was lighter in retrospect and also not the Pro Max size. It was just the regular Pro. But this thing in my hand, it's crazy. You totally feel a difference. To be honest, I thought that would bug me a lot. It's not like so heavy to where like you get hand fatigue, or at least I don't personally. But that extra weight actually, honestly, in my opinion, makes it feel a little bit more premium. You feel like you paid for something that's worth its weight. Like it just feels like a really premium chunk of like solid metal and just awesomeness. Another thing to note too is when I'm using it without a case, I noticed that the back has a little bit of a different texture to it. So as you guys can see, I went with the silver and white version this year. This white almost, I don't know if it comes across this way, but it almost looks like pearl. It very much reminds me of pearl. I don't know why, but it's like such a like glossy, like matte white. the texture of it, it feels different on my hand than like the Pacific Blue Pro from last year. That one, like when you would touch the back of it, it almost felt like your hand would like slip off of it. It didn't really like grip my hand the same way that the back does on this year's model. But that white just looks so good. It's like a smoky pearl kind of color. And then you get the stainless steel band around the outside, which I'm all about, and it matches all my stuff. It just looks so dope. It just feels very, very, very durable. Now, something to note, due to the new design, if you do get the Pro model, not the Pro Max, so the smaller version of this, and you do use a MagSafe Duo for charging, because of how big the camera bump is, it actually will sit up a little bit on the actual charging unit. Apparently it still charges. I guess just the magnetic connection isn't as strong. I'm sure they're gonna release a new version of the MagSafe Duo that accommodates the bigger camera bump, because bags. Not a problem at all with the Pro Max models, but just something I thought I'd let you know considering it's design related. Now, another thing that I totally noticed was how much better the speakers are. This stuff is wild how much better it is. I can't even like put it into words. I mean, it's not like a Sonos surround sound by any means, but as far as built-in speakers go, they are rich, it gets loud, and it is super clear. So, things in certain scenarios where I wouldn't be able to hear my phone on full volume, I can now hear it super well and very clearly. And we're gonna touch on this in a moment, but since it's kind of part of the new design, we are going to talk about the A15 Bionic chip that now powers this bad boy. Holy crap, is it fast. So I'm gonna talk about how quick it is in a moment when we get to the screen portion of the review. But geez, you are gonna be so blown away at how quickly things open and close with that new chip inside of it. It's got more cores, just a whole bunch of technical mumbo jumbo that basically means this guy is screaming fast. Now, moving on from design, let's talk about the cameras. So the first thing that I noticed is how much better these cameras are in low light. So they introduced like the low light mode where it holds the exposure open for a little bit longer and it takes forever and you have to hold it still, and there's just, that's been a feature that's been on the previous iPhones. But when we're talking about this new iteration of it, I was walking around in Ballard last night near Seattle and I was just taking pictures of things, and it is wild how much more detail you get. It's so much sharper. I would say that's like the big thing that I noticed, was how sharp all of the low light photos are. So I could see, the details in the clouds, and like you could see how sharp the paint was on the walls. It's just like, I don't know, it's a level of detail that you definitely have never gotten on an iPhone camera before. In low light scenarios, due to those big hunking camera bumps right there, you're definitely gonna get that huge bump in low light performance. You're also gonna get features like cinematic mode, which allows you to choose a focal point and have the background blurry and kind of get like a depth of field effect similar to what you would be able to produce on a real camera, where you can rack the focus. That's super neat. You apparently also can do it on the front facing camera, which is cool. Cinematic mode is locked to 1080p at 30 frames per second, at least for the time being, but it is a pretty neat feature that I personally really enjoyed messing around with and just getting to, show people and really blow their minds with the fact that that was shot on a phone camera. Another neat tidbit about cinematic mode is that after you shoot a clip, let's say that you didn't quite get the focus rack the way you wanted, you actually can go back in and change the focal point of where you want it to be throughout a video that's already been shot, which is really neat and not something you'd be able to do on like an actual camera with, a racking focus. On top of that, you can also adjust the f-stop to kind of choose how blurry you want that out of focus area to be, which is another really wild feature that's built into a phone camera. Now, as for the picture quality of it, if you compare it to a real camera, it's not anywhere near as good. There's haloing, the focus racking AI sometimes is a little bit jumpy. There's kind of a myriad of things that I'm sure Apple's gonna fix as time goes on, similar to what we saw them do with portrait mode, how it's gotten a lot better over years. But if you compare this feature to just a regular phone camera, it's unbelievable how much better I feel like it is. I don't know, I just think for a phone camera, comparing it to other phone shots, mind-blowing. If you compare it to like a real camera, not quite there yet. but still impressive nonetheless. Now, another really neat addition that they added to the Pro lineup this year was the ability to shoot macro photography and macro video. So for those of you who don't know, macro photography is just when you get really close up to an item. It allows you to get the whole image in focus at a very, very close distance. It's almost like a microscope, how focused you can get. It's pretty nuts. So the fact that they brought this to the iPhone 13 Pros, phenomenal. As for the picture quality, it's way better than, you know, any other phone macro photography that I've personally seen. It also beats the hell out of having one of those like third-party lenses that you have to have a special case to screw on, or like, you know, you've seen those things probably in the past. I personally have. And having used one of those in the past and then trying this out, it's wild that it's built right into your phone now. And everyone I showed this feature to was super blown away. As for how it performs, right now, you know, it currently will automatically switch to macro mode if you get too close to an item. Apparently Apple's going to be turning that feature off in the past to allow you to manually choose if you wanted to automatically switch or that type of thing. But as for the moment, the only way to get into macro mode is just get close to an item. And if you're trying to get close to an item and you don't want to be in macro mode, you're kind of out of luck at the moment. But apparently in the near future, that's coming in an update and we'll be able to kind of opt out of that or adjust how that ends up working. Also, another tidbit too, macro mode really shines when you're in a very well lit, you know, situation. But it doesn't work too well when it's in like a low light situation. So it's still a limitation, but just know that if you're trying to shoot macro photography, make sure the lighting is pretty good. The ultra wide angle camera on this year's iPhone 13 also got a pretty good update. It's a lot less grainy. I think you get a lot more detail. It overall looks really good. I definitely noticed a big bump in the ultra wide. As for the telephoto, I don't ever really use that, but there was certain scenarios where you'd zoom in a lot. You just have to deal with like the digital zoom past a certain point. It is what it is. There's always like some scenario where you want to zoom in. When I went and I tested out the, you know, I believe it's a 3x optical zoom now. When I shot some shots with it, I was pretty impressed with how much detail I saw inside the fully zoomed in image. Like for a phone camera to have, you know, that good of a detailed shot. I mean, I know it's no space zoom camera like on some Samsung phones, but as someone who doesn't use a zoom lens that often, when you do, it's nice to have one that's pretty decent. I think the iPhone made a jump this year with that. I believe they went from a 2.5x to a 3x, so slow and steady, but we're getting there, we're getting better. And one of the last features I wanted to talk about that has to do with the camera system is more so on the software side, but it's with the introduction of something called photographic styles. So styles is essentially a feature that Apple added into the phone. It's basically a selection of different presets that can kind of tailor the look to the photograph to what you personally prefer. So every single phone brand kind of has a different look to the way their photos are, whether they're more vibrant or color neutral or just, you know, they all have their own different look. And essentially Apple wanted to try to compete with all those different camera looks by letting you choose a preset essentially that can be your default to where every photo you take will look like that style. And so they're very adamant that these aren't filters. They don't really look like filters. This, you know, it's just a very subtle shift that kind of adjusts the way the look of the photos are, and depending on what you personally prefer, you can go ahead and, you know, set one as your default, set one for a specific photo. It's just a cool little feature that Apple threw in there that none of us were really expecting, but I'm sure it'll get its use. I played around with it as far as like testing it goes. I haven't really set my own style, but I'm sure I'll dial that in as time goes on. But yeah, it's just a neat little feature that I thought I'd bring up as well. Now this is the big one. This is the one that I think made the biggest difference to me. And if you're on the fence about getting an iPhone 13 Pro, this would be the kicker and what I personally think is the biggest update, and that would be the screen. So the screen this year on Apple's iPhone is a variable refresh rate, 120 Hertz OLED panel. So for those of you who don't know what that means, essentially it just means that the screen is going to be really bright, have extremely good contrast, so the blacks are super black, the whites are super bright and white, and everything in between looks phenomenal because you're getting that OLED panel. And then you also get a variable refresh rate up to 120 Hertz, which basically just means the screen can refresh up to 120 times in a second, and, you know, throttle that all the way down to just only 10 times in a second if it's a really static image. So one, that's gonna save you battery life. Two, it's gonna be unbelievable how smooth it is when you're scrolling and just interacting with the device. I wasn't able to film a good video that showed this off because it's really hard to have this come across well on a camera. But it's one of those things that as soon as you pick up one of these in a store, or if a friend gets one and you try it out, it is mind-blowing how much snappier everything feels. It's just immediate. You feel like you're part of the screen when you're moving things around. It's wild. I also saw this really good video on Twitter that I'm gonna put in the video here so you can kind of see. It's basically a slow-mo shot showing like a quick scroll between an 120 hertz screen and a 60 hertz screen, which is what the iPhones have used up until now. But yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing how much better it looks as it, you go side to side. It's extremely snappy and extremely quick. This, in tandem with the A15 Bionic processor, the whole phone, it just feels like another jump up. Like normally when Apple has a processor upgrade each year, you feel how it's a lot quicker, but then you kind of get used to it pretty quick, and then a year from then you're like, geez, it's getting kind of slow. This year, the bump in processor mixed with the bump in the refresh rate of the screen, you will absolutely notice how quickly the whole phone jumps around. It feels so good, and I think it's well worth the upgrade in my personal opinion. So the next thing I want to talk about is the storage capacity. So this year, the iPhones will start at 128 gigs and go all the way up to a terabyte actually. And the reason Apple included the terabyte option is with the introduction of something called ProRes video. So I didn't talk about this in the camera section of this review because ProRes video isn't currently available, but it's basically a much higher resolution and more information, pro level video codec that gives you much more information and much more flexibility if you're trying to do things like color correcting in post and things of that nature. 99.9% of people probably won't even use this feature. Even me, as someone who shoots a lot of videos, I probably won't use this feature, but it is something that's available, and in order to get the full capacity of it, you do need to get at least the 256 gigabyte model. I think I read somewhere that like 1 minute of ProRes takes like 6 gigabytes, so this type of footage is gonna chew up your storage like crazy. If you are planning on getting an iPhone to shoot in ProRes, you probably want to get the 1 terabyte unless you're okay with constantly offloading videos. For me personally, I got the 256 gigabyte model just because that's what I've had previously, and I find it's kind of the perfect sweet spot, especially with my maxed out iCloud storage, offloading content to iCloud and just kind of optimizing the storage that's on my phone. I found that 256 was enough to where I could get everything I wanted and still have plenty of space left over and not have to worry about it, but also not have to pay a ton more for just a bunch of storage I'm not using. So I personally got 256. But yeah, I find that that's probably kind of like the sweet spot. Now, before we wrap things up, I wanted to talk about the battery life of the phone. So having gone from a 12 Pro to a Pro Max, the Pro Max has already had the best battery life, and because the 13 lineup is a little bit thicker with a bigger battery in them and moving to a Pro Max size battery, my battery life has been unbelievably better. Like, I can't even put into words how much better it is. I'm totally okay with a little bit thicker of a phone if that means better battery life, because on my previous phone, I think after a year of use, or honestly like 11 months of use, and I use my phone pretty heavily, I think my battery health was at like 87%. So having the bigger battery life and all the new optimizations that are coming with the new devices, I have been power using my phone like non-stop, and the battery life has been super impressive. So right now it's like almost 2 p.m. I haven't charged my phone once today, and I've been using it non-stop, and I'm at 70%. So for what that's worth, being at 70% by 2 p.m., having used my phone basically since I woke up, that's a big improvement for me personally. So, mileage will vary depending on the user, but something to just think of if you're looking for a phone that you can just kind of set it and forget it kind of thing. It's pretty significant how much better the battery life is. So touching on what I mentioned at the beginning of this review, when I was watching the announcement video and reading all the rumors and all that stuff leading up to the event, this iPhone felt like a lot of incremental upgrades. It didn't feel like a big leap year. But I think there was something really unique with this year's incremental upgrade. There were so many pretty good incremental upgrades that it honestly overall left this year's iPhone lineup feeling a lot bigger of an update than I figured it would be. So I didn't feel like it would be this big of a jump, but having used this phone now for a little bit, it honestly feels like a way bigger update than I was expecting. So I use my phone's camera all the time. I love to take video. I love taking photos. I think low light, taking photos at nighttime and just kind of those lower light situations are things that I do all the time. And the upgrades that you get with this year's lineup, it's pretty ridiculous how much better it is. Like, I genuinely feel like it was a big camera update. The main way you interact with your phone is by touching the screen and interacting with the screen, and having a brighter OLED that's now ProMotion, that felt like a significantly bigger update. So that alone was like one of the coolest, bounces up that I know Samsung users have had for years, but Apple, when they do their upgrades, they try to make sure they do it right, and I feel like they absolutely knocked it out of the park. I haven't felt like the ProMotion has messed with the battery life at all, and I feel like it's done nothing but just make the whole experience feel significantly snappier, especially with the integrations on the A15 Bionic chip. The battery life just feels so much better. The difference in weight and the way it feels in your hand, that build quality kind of difference, I don't know about you, but for me personally, it felt just like a more premium item. Like, you really feel like you got something super nice in your hand. That has been a welcome change. Overall, just a ton of like little incremental upgrades, not too much of a design overhaul, but all of these things mushed together. It felt like a really well worth it bump in quality. And not to mention, I was able to sell my phone from last year for almost like 80% of the price of my new phone. So I basically, only took a couple $100 hit essentially to get this new phone. So for me, that was absolutely worth it. I highly recommend that, if you haven't upgraded your iPhone in a couple years, now is a great time to do it, and you'll get one that's gonna last you for quite a long time. If you do happen to have one of the 12 models and you've kept it in good condition and you're able to maybe sell it and you're fine with dealing with that whole process, you typically can get better selling it to another person out there than you would trading it in at Apple. I think it's worth upgrading personally, and I would definitely recommend it. If you don't care about a lot of the things that I mentioned and those type of improvements don't justify having to deal with the headache of having to get a new phone, then maybe don't upgrade. I think the 12 lineup was fantastic. And so those are just kind of my thoughts on it. I overall am super excited. If you haven't been able to tell by the ridiculous amount of videos I've been filming, I do have more in the pipeline as well. If you guys have any questions at all, or you want to make sure you're entered in my giveaway, shoot them down in the comment section below. You can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, and I'll try to get back to you. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.